All right, I am delighted to welcome on the show today Chris Ann, who is a deck creator, an artist, a magic maker, and a lover of all things having to do with energy medicine. And she is the beloved creator of the Sacred Creators Oracle, the Lightseer's Tarot, and the Muse Tarot. Today we're here to talk about the Lightseer's Tarot because it's had an incredible impact on tarot communities worldwide. I see it everywhere. People love it. They just really resonate with this deck. So the first question number one that I would like to ask you is, what's different about this deck? What made you decide that this deck in particular had to come into being? What was going on for you at the time?
So when I created Lightseers, when I started, I actually wasn't going to create another deck in my mind. I was finished I had done the Sacred Creators Oracle. It's a huge undertaking to create a deck when you're doing the art and the writing. And I thought that I was done. I was teaching at the Nice Tarot Summer School at the time, and she had asked me to create a course called Creating Your Own Oracle and Tarot Deck. Mm-hmm. And I had done the Oracle deck, but I'd never done a tarot deck. But I really was going to walk students through how to do the printing and kind of all of that stuff. And in the process of creating that course, I created a PDF for students on, if you were to make a tarot deck, what would your suits be? What is your special thing that you want to bring to the world? And I created that PDF and went to bed. And the next day I woke up and I was like, I have all of these ideas for that
you
PDF.
were pregnant.
Little did I know, right? Lo and behold, there was a deck in there.
Yeah.
But truly, when I started filling that form in, I realized that I did desire this deck for myself. I wanted a deck that felt very contemporary, very easy to read. I'm Canadian and I've got a very multicultural, multiracial family. And so I wanted a deck that looked like my family, that looked like my friends, that looked like my circle. That was important to me. And I really wanted a deck that felt healing. I just feel like I was really the recipient of great timing and good luck.
Yes, perhaps so, but also a great deal of talent and love went into that deck. So can you say a little bit more? You said that you wanted it to be a healing deck. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? What is it that you were seeing in other decks that was missing?
So a lot of decks, my deck follows the Rider-Waite-Smith, but there are some changes to some of the concepts. And so, a lot of decks that I was using were pictures of the exact same scenarios from the original. Yeah. And I knew that I wanted something that would speak to more contemporary situations. Yeah. Versus, nobody's walking around in 2019 with swords, right?
Generally, no.
Right?
Yeah.
So I wanted something, and I do have some swords in my deck, but
yeah,
I still wanted the vibe or the feeling or the scenarios to be more just something that we could look at and instinctively understand.
Yeah.
And I also, because I'm such a fan of energy work and I've done so much of my own learning and work around energy, I wanted something where I could see energy in the deck. There are, you might notice like the light swooshes that kind of go through a lot of the cards, but there's also little dots that actually, if you line the cards up side by side, most of the cards have these little energetic dots that sort of connect one to the other that flow through the cards.
Oh my God. Wow.
They're tiny little
That's
dots.
amazing. Yes. That's what those are doing.
Right? And so I wanted to be able to pull my cards out and lay them side by side and see what they were saying to one another as I read them, kind of in pairings or in threes. And I just wanted to see that energy run through them. Yeah. And just as like a reminder to self that what is the energy behind this? How are they speaking to one another? And maybe just as a little extra intuitive flicker for when we're reading that goes beyond just, the standard meanings.
You talk about the Lightseer and the Shadow Seer. Can you tell me a little bit about the distinction between those two?
Sure, sure. I mean, in my opinion, my perspective, I don't think that anyone can be a great light worker without being really great at distinguishing and seeing shadow. And conversely, nobody can do shadow work unless they can really recognize light. And because if you are working with uncovering your shadow projections, and the things that you can't necessarily see in ourselves, right? When we're working on ourselves this way, it's really, really important to be able to kind of tether yourself to light, to pull yourself out of that so that you don't romanticize the shadow. And if you're doing any sort of light work, or you consider yourself a light worker, I mean, you have to be adept at seeking, seeing, and finding shadow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
I do.
It's just really, one cannot exist without the other.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to play with that. That's why my deck is obviously called Lightseers, but in the guidebook there's the light messages and the shadow messages.
Do you think of the shadow messages as being something like reading it reversed?
Yes. Yes, that's the way I set it up.
Yeah.
That's the way I set it up.
Yeah, I remember thinking, looking at your devil card, that's the most handsome devil I have ever seen in any deck. And I liked that because it just seemed very real about what the temptations actually look like and how we respond to them. And, it's not as though if you saw a traditional devil card from a tarot deck, you'd probably go running. But the experience of the devil is not like that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? That card was, the idea came early on, but it wasn't the easiest card to figure out exactly, because when I was creating that card, I knew that I wanted to have this devil be like, I want that, right? Because there's nothing that's a vice or an addiction or that's going to offer, it's going to offer us that sort of shadow experience that doesn't feel lovely in the beginning.
Right.
And I also didn't want him to be scary necessarily, because I didn't want people to shy away from the deck. I mean, I grew up in a very Catholic household. I wasn't allowed to play with tarot when I was young, and it was always, that devil card that still to this day, when I'm using a deck, can be a card that sort of, it's very assaulting. It's just so...
Many people feel like that, yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted it to be a card that we could look at and get the message. But then I also wanted to add those more serious aspects of the card. So there are these gold flecks that are in the hair. The hair kind of goes all wild into the edges of the card. Yeah. And those gold flecks are sort of in the shape of horns. And at one point, there were a lot more of them. But then I thought, that's just... It's almost became too much for my taste. So I just sort of pulled them back a bit and then added the puppet figure on the hand.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how you make your art, how you created the images in this deck, from the inspiration to the actual media that you're using.
So I am a graphic designer by trade. I've got, 25 plus years in that industry. So the cards are digital, but there are some hand-drawn elements. So I sort of started out doing them by hand. Actually, the first card that showed up in that deck was the Four of Wands. And I did it completely by hand.
Do you mean on analog media?
Pen and ink.
Pen and ink. Wow. Yeah.
Pen and ink, and then with that one in particular was pen and ink with pencil crayons, but it did end up getting totally redone because I started changing my process along the way. Number one, I am not a good enough artist with just paper and pen. I can draw, but I just I couldn't get the look exactly that I had in my mind. Yeah. And so I'm much better with my digital tools. So I'll jump into Photoshop to do all of the coloring. I'll use like actual skies as backgrounds and then recolor them. So I mean, I do a lot of digital collage. So, but then I also wanted that pen and ink feeling. So there are some cards, the Empress, the Strength card, the Chariot, like some of the ones I did out of the gates where the actual pen work is on paper.
Oh, how interesting.
And then I would scan it and then bring the pen into, or bring just the ink drawing into Photoshop and color it.
Wow.
And then I spent a really long time trying to find the perfect pen tool so that I could use my stylus to match what I'd already done.
Oh, I see.
So
Yeah.
I kind of changed and transitioned partway through the project just because it just took so much longer with the actual pen and ink. And then I would be redrawing it, and I really wanted my delete button.
Yes, 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 exactly. And that feeling of like sketching with a pencil or a pen and like tapping or trying to go Control Z and nothing happens. Yeah.
Right. Especially, I've got so many years of design under my belt
Yeah.
that just felt like a more natural tool.
Yeah.
But I wanted that hand-drawn feel. So that's where I started with my sketchbook. I started actually drawing them. And then it just eventually evolved. So there is a blend where some of the cards, like the Ace of Wands, is hand-drawn, where the Ace of Swords was done completely on the computer. So.
Which is sort of apt somehow for the Ace of Swords. I think. I don't know. It's airy.
And the Ace of Wands.
Yeah. What about for the people? Are they all based on people in real life?
No, some of them are, definitely. Some of them I had specific people in mind. Some of them it was just a matter of the feeling that I wanted to convey.
Yeah.
The sensation. A lot of them have, I would say a lot of them have the roots of their inspiration in people that I knew. Or saw, because it's so much time and you spend so much energy in tarot world and thinking about archetypes that that it was really good for me to go out into coffee shops and almost just, I'd be sitting and whoever was around me as I'm drawing, because I had my computer and my I used like a tablet and my stylus, so taking up quite a bit of coffee shop space. And then listening to conversations that people would have as they were sitting beside me and chatting, not necessarily listening to the whole thing, but that happens. You
get a vibe.
You're just doing your thing and you hear people chatting.
Yeah.
And that was a really cool way to kind of find some of the stories and find some of the archetypes.
Yeah, I think that's why perhaps the deck really just has such a human presence about it. It seems very alive that way. Yeah. Which kind of brings us to the third question, which is, were there any cards that really gave you trouble in terms of like, it took you a long time or you struggled with it, or, anything like that you'd like to share?
The Hermit was the card that just wasn't coming. And it's funny because I am Virgo sun.
Cosine.
Virgo rising.
Yeah.
And I had no idea when I was starting tarot that the Virgo and the Hermit were aligned.
No kidding.
But I always felt so drawn to the Hermit.
Yeah.
At the beginning of my tarot journey, and some people do this for their whole entire tarot lives, but for me it was more maybe the first 5 years that I was working with cards. I always wanted to see the Hermit. The Hermit was like the card that I had to see before I would buy a deck or before I would fall in love with a deck. The Hermit was wrong, like the deck wasn't for me. And so I've had this long, beautiful relationship with the Hermit. And when I was creating my deck, I had finished almost all of the cards. All the majors were done. It was the very last major to show up. It was, I don't remember if it was one of the last 5 card sorts of thing to come alive. And I was really worried about that because it felt so important to me because it has been such an anchor for me in my tarot experience.
Yeah.
I spent so long, sitting, sketching, sitting with crickets. What is my hermit? I can't figure out my
He was
hermit.
traveling far away in a distant land.
Right? Absolutely. And of course, like, ironically, I had to let it go. And I had to say, okay, I'm just going to like leave this project for a week, and I'm going to spend some time not in my head about it. And I'm going to truly get back to my meditation practice. And I'm really going to actually hermit. And it took just, I can't tell you exactly the number of days, but it wasn't long before the hermit came into like full force in my mind. And it was just a matter of sitting with that energy for real. And I hadn't sat with that energy for a while because I was just so lovingly obsessed with the project. I was
Yes.
living this
Yes.
project.
Yeah.
I had to step away, had to become my own hermit. And sitting and meditating, the
Yeah.
idea came like, boom, of course, it's someone meditating.
Of
How do I
course.
then
Yeah.
create the story of the hermit around the meditator?
It's a really beautiful card. And I think that, I connect with it too, maybe also because of being a Virgo sun, but there's a sense of solitude and peace in that card, which I think is severely lacking, more or less, for all of us, in daily life. There's, even when you're alone, there's the lure of the phone, there's just the mental chatter and the anxiety of what's going on in the news. It's very hard to kind of turn the volume down on all of that and find that solitude and peace.
It is
Yeah,
so important right now.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I just had, um, I, I'll I suspect that most of the listeners won't know this. I had a brain injury in September, and that caused me to be off screens for 5 months.
Wow.
So my relationship with presence right now, and my relationship with what that means in our busy digital lives, to actually be totally tuned out, I can't even tell you how that changed my perspective on our digital worlds
Mm-hmm.
and how much they hinder and hijack our nervous systems. Being able to quiet and really hermit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, number one, it was a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what a gift it is, even though at the time I didn't see it as a gift because I just wanted to heal. Right? It's
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
same. It wasn't as romantic as it may sound because I wasn't sure I would come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So if
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
knew that, oh, in 5 months you're going to be fine and you're
Yeah.
going to be able to work again, then I wouldn't have had the same worries about it, and I would have just been able to really enjoy it. But even so, there were still moments of such presence that I didn't realize it was as possible to have that type of presence, that type of it was really hermit energy. I was like a kid in high school, like pre-cell phones is the type of presence I felt, where I would be looking at the rain on the glass, or in the
Yes.
winter, I had joy trying to catch snowflakes. And I haven't felt that. I mean, I could mimic that as an adult and say, "Oh, do you remember how much fun that was when we were kids?" But I actually felt that same wonder and joy at just real reality,
Yes. Yes.
3D world,
Yeah.
because that was all I had.
That's so beautiful. I mean, I feel it certainly that whenever I'm enjoying myself outside, there's like this little voice in the back of my head saying, "Why don't you take a picture of that with your phone?" And now I'm looking at the world through my phone instead of through my eyes, and that's a
Yes.
very different feeling.
Oh, it so is.
Yeah.
And I used to tell myself, "Oh, I'm taking this picture so that I'll remember it," or because it's like an artistic way to experience this moment. And sometimes that's
It
very
can
true.
be. Yeah.
Yes. But sometimes what I've realized, really being out of it and coming back, is that there's also the little voice that's telling us to take the picture, because it's like we're front loading the dopamine that we will get for sharing that picture.
That's very
You
interesting.
know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
we're creating the thing because we know You know, the moment I realize now, the moment if I'm taking a picture and it's just for me, there's no sense of I'm going to imagine sharing this.
Right. Right.
The moment that I'm imagining that I'm going to share it, which is 99% of the time, that's part of me kind of desiring the external validation or desiring to be seen or desiring the likes. And that's, you know, that's when there's a spell that's been broken for me.
Yeah, there's something about the quality of our attention that is magical, and when it's fractured the way it is all the time right now, it is like a spell is being broken, like we're disenchanted in some way.
Yes.
And yeah, it's hard to get that back. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, for anyone listening, if you want to, I would just challenge you to do something that is beautiful, where you get to go see beauty, and whether that's going to a concert and saying, I'm not going to bring out my phone and I'm just going to really experience this with my heart and my eyes and my body.
Yeah.
That is a wild experiment, but one worth taking. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when we've been talking about the hermit, that is kind of answering the next question, which is tell me the story behind one card in your deck. But I wonder if there's any other ones that you'd really love to share the story because it's particularly special to you.
I'm going to go with the strength card because it's the one that's coming to mind. And I have talked about it before, but it is the strength card for me is based on my cousin, one of my cousins who is a phenomenal woman, and her name is Donna Smenak. And she had, just prior to me working on the deck, she had gotten a cancer diagnosis. And she is one of these people who is wildly intuitive and very spiritual and has a really strong connection with God. And part of her healing and part of her process, and this is not for everyone, but her decision when she got her cancer diagnosis, so she was 41 or 40 when she had her cancer diagnosis, and it was cervical cancer. And she decided that she wasn't going to do any chemo or any meds. That just was her way. And so she did all the things. She went and did her smoothies and all of her greens and changed her diet and changed her life, and her cancer progressed. And the family, of course, wanted her to go get her standard Western medicine. But she said, no way, it just wasn't for her. And she read cards, as she more oracle cards. That's more her thing, was, the angel cards, the oracle cards. Sure. She changed, she started doing meditation and imagining herself at a lake, and imagining that that she was going to be loved for her children. She got 5 kids, and she was a single mom. And she just decided that for the last bit of their lives that she was just going to be love. And that's all she was going to do. She was like, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm just going to show them what it is to be love. And I'm going to be love so that's the way they remember me. Wow. And she went down to see John of God. She did all of the spiritual, sort of healing things. And her cancer went away. She had 4 kids at the time. But her cancer, she had one of those spontaneous remissions.
Oh my God.
Where the doctors don't know how, why, she does. She knows that it was her stepping into love, feeling love, and becoming fearless, and just changing the way she felt about everything. And she decided the next year that she wanted to have a baby, even after having this cancer, and she did. So she was 42.
My goodness.
Or 43, one of those two, when she had my young cousin. Yeah. Oh, and who is now like 19. So, yeah. Yeah, it's so for me, when I was thinking about that card, I mean, that's a really big story.
It's a huge story. Yeah.
And I was looking at who in my life has had that sort of impact on my understanding of strength.
Yeah.
And who would it be? And it was her, because she was just so strong in her faith and her conviction. And
Yeah.
I certainly don't think I would be as strong as she was, but she's become this sort of living metaphor or living archetype for me about what it looks like to have so much courage and so little fear in the face of calamity. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What a story. My goodness. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like kind of combining the traditional elements of the strength card with this vision of your cousin that you had?
right. So I knew that I didn't want the lion to be, normally there's this like maiden holding the mouth of the lion, right?
Yeah.
But I wanted it to be the lion in her, because I feel
Mm-hmm.
like the monsters that she must have had to fight were inside. So I had the half lion face, half woman face,
Yeah. Yeah.
an internal thing that she would have had to just like quash. She's just quelling this massive amount of fear and external opinion and worries. And that's also why the lamb is there.
Mm-hmm.
We have this sense of the lamb being so calm and so innocent, but also because my cousin is, she's not religious, but she's just so fiercely spiritual.
Yeah.
But the lion and the lamb is also quite, that's part of just religious iconography. And so I wanted to add that there in some way, but
Yeah.
also in a way that people didn't necessarily see religion, because I know so many of us have this sort of weird religious wounding.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. With the strength card, at least in the modern era of tarot, certainly historically, there was kind of a brute strength quality, could be a brute strength quality to the card, but it's really come to mean soft power of a kind. And soft really doesn't mean weak. It's that the fortitude is internal. The fortitude is something that is a character quality as opposed to something you impose on other people. And I think that that's both the story and the card itself really capture that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It ends up that is one of my favorite cards in the deck.
Yeah.
As I look back on the process and how they made me feel when I was creating them, and the joy that they brought to me, because all the cards have their joys that they can bring.
Yeah.
But drawing that particular card, just because it's such a personal loved one,
Mm-hmm.
it just
Mm-hmm.
filled my heart with a special kind of, magic.
Yes. Yes. How did your cousin receive the drawing, the image?
Oh, I gave her the deck. I think she just loved the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a really big support for me through the process, and through the process of also getting it out into the world. And I really wasn't ready for it to be a success. I didn't have the mindset for that. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have the strength as an artist to have so many eyeballs and opinions on my work. I wasn't ready for it at all. And so she is an excellent energy healer and walked me through that process. Yeah.
How long did it take you in all to create the deck?
It was about 18 months
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
of the actual kind of in it creating,
Yeah.
which I'm not even really sure, looking back, how number one, I managed that financially, and two, how I knew that it was going to be fine. Being so inspired, I actually had chosen a word of the year in 2017 or 2018. The word was mused, as in that mused as like a verb, let
Yeah.
the muse run through. And oh my gosh, it happened, because I was doing this deck. Partway through this deck, I started getting the Whispers of the Muse tarot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kickstarted both decks. So I did 2 decks over 2 years, and
That's insane.
It was. It was. It was like a wildfire of inspiration moment. I don't think I will ever experience that type of inspiration again. I don't suspect, because my body could not handle it. Like, we cannot live in that state of such high frequency inspiration.
Yeah, it's ecstatic gnosis. Yeah.
Exactly. I felt like, I mean, all you got it. Ecstatic gnosis was
Yeah.
felt almost manic, even though it wouldn't have been described that way by a psychiatrist.
I think that our Jungian friends would say that you were being touched by the archetype. And that is an incredible numinous feeling, but not sustainable for a human being.
It
Yeah.
certainly is not. No,
Yeah.
100%. I was exhausted afterwards.
Yeah.
I burnt out about 4 months after launch.
Mm-hmm.
I was because I was sometimes working 18 hours a day. I couldn't even sleep. I was just in this like fever, you know?
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful, and that was exactly what I wanted to feel. I'd called that in.
Mm-hmm.
Now I am so open to the muse, and let me state this clearly. Muse, I am here. I will work with you. I will be your hands, but let's do it like 8 hours a day. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Wonderful. Okay, so I think it's time for us to do a one-card reading.
Yay!
I'm so excited. So, do you have a question that you would like to ask?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So I am coming out of my concussed and, very non-able to work state. And I am currently jumping into writing because that's what's been coming.
Mm-hmm.
But I am so scattered. My brain is all over the place with the new me that exists post-concussion.
Yeah.
And I have written in the past 2 months probably 100,000 words.
That's
Which
a
could
lot.
be 2 books or 3 books if there's any kind of doodles, or 5 books with art.
Yeah.
But none of it matches. So I've got 100,000 words that just poured out of me in the last few months because I just needed to emote, because I couldn't do anything, right? I could just think for a long time.
Yes. Yes.
And so I have all of this stuff pouring out of me, and I feel like I'm spinning because it's just production with no goal. So the muse is coming through in a weird words kind of way. Very disconnected, very disjointed. And I guess I would just like any guidance that you can see on maybe how to put it together, or where it's headed, or even some,
Yeah.
really any nugget that will give me a little bit of an anchor at this point would be phenomenal.
I get that. Okay, so I'm going to do this the same way I do it with my clients. I'm going to ask you to see where the camera with the cards is. If you can
yes.
pin that so that it's big on your screen.
Oh,
I'll
you're
do the
using
same thing.
Lightseers.
Yes, of
Cool.
course. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, you're going to choose the card, but what I'm going to ask you to do is hold that feeling of this almost massive throughput that's been coming through you the last couple of months, and that rush of words that you don't know quite what to do with. And I would like you to imagine that flowing through you and then taking on direction, taking on form, coalescing into something tangible and real. And once you've got that feeling, go ahead and look at the cards and see if anyone in particular is calling to you.
Okay, so it is the card that's it's close to the center. It's almost horizontal, and it's just to the left of where you are. There you go.
This one over
Yep.
here. Okay, good. Yes, that one's prominent. Okay, I'm going to gather up the rest of them, and then we'll have a good look at what's going on with that card. It is the Four of Pentacles. Very interesting. Okay. So, before I jump in, do you have anything you'd like to say about the Four of Pentacles?
Right. So, two things came to mind. The first one was that maybe I'm trying to hold things back in a way that makes sense and I'm not being generous enough with my ideas. That was what my brain said. But that's the way I interpret it, and yours, I'm hoping that, you'll give me something totally different. And the other thing is that that is the card that always, it reminds me so much of my niece and goddaughter.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
beautiful.
yeah.
It's beautiful. Yeah, so what I thought when I saw this was that you have accumulated this massive hoard of material, this treasure trove over the last couple of months. I often think of this card as being kind of money in the bank that way, right? And it's also the Lord of Power. So I think one way to look at it might be that there's a security in knowing that that's there, and that you don't have to accumulate anymore if you don't want to. It's there. And the other thing about this card, because it's a four, and I think of fours as being quite structured, I think of them as being quite structured. It's okay for you to, you know, look at your hoard and start appreciating it and start giving it organization and start giving it structure, and recognize that it's a gift that is already complete, that it just requires your attention to come forward. One of the things that I like about the Four of Pentacles, is that I think of it as being a card of inherited resources, right? Especially if you go all the way back to the Tarot de Marseille, and there's like the shield in the middle of the Four Pentacles, which to me kind of represents the family, the family inheritance, and for me, it's always had that feeling of, here are all the resources that you need. Yes, one of the reactions to having those resources is to feel like you need to hold on to them real tight. But another reaction is simply to feel safe, right? So maybe this card could have to do with feeling safe and secure in all of the material that you've generated, and now having the freedom from that to do what you like.
Thank you.
I can't
I love
wait
that
to see what comes out of it.
And I will validate that it's so bang on for me, because I do have this sense of wanting to speak to all of these things that maybe I don't have a degree in, or but I know a lot about, like, mystical things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. And I also do have this underlying strange sensation of needing to do it or wanting to do it quickly. And I'm in a different position than I was when I did Lightseers. And even through this conversation, I feel like it's become very clear to me that I just need to have that same kind of faith that, the process will take as long as it needs to take, and it's going to be fine.
It is going to be fine. I
Thank
also
you.
think that one thing I'd like to also offer is that perhaps there's ancestral presence helping you out with this. That's just, this is not necessarily something that you'll, is a shared tarot reading of the Four of Pentacles, but something I've observed about it is that, for me at least, with the Four of Pentacles and the Four of Cups, I often feel like I'm being watched over by my ancestors. And perhaps that's true, especially because here you are in this card watching over your young relative and depicting her in there. And perhaps there are ancestors who see you just as you saw her.
Oh my goodness, you just gave me goosebumps because I've never seen the Four of Pentacles that way, and this sure is my niece, you know?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that is so, yeah, what beautiful serendipity, and you have forever changed the way I see the Four of Pence. Thank you.
She looks so. Mm, she has this incredible presence, right? She has this incredible presence and this. It's interesting because although she's holding the purse in, very close to her body, I don't see a grasping quality in her at all.
Yeah.
There's a restfulness. I really love it. Okay, well, thank you so much. It has been a joy to have this conversation with you, and I hope we have a chance to speak again soon.
Me too. Thank you so much. This was fun.